Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I hope you are all having an amazing week and that it's wrapping up, coming to the end of the week nicely. I do see that a few more people are logging in here. So while we wait for them, I know we have a number of registrants for this webinar today, wherever you are in the world. So we'll just give them a moment to log on. But while we wait for them, if you could go ahead and tell me a little bit of information about yourself, whether you are brand new to analytics, maybe you just want to dive a little bit deeper. And I would also love to learn where in the world you might be sheltering in place or where you're located. So if you could just navigate to the chat and tell me a little bit of information about yourself, that way I can make sure to tailor this webinar to all of you. And I keep seeing the number of connected folks here continuously increase, so we'll just give everyone a few more seconds to log on and we'll go ahead and get started. Wonderful. Well, it looks like we have people from all over the world. I am based in Paris, France, with our European headquarters. And I was actually in San Francisco for a number of years and recently transferred out here, but super excited to dive in to analytics today. This is a special topic webinar. We do about one special topic every month. So for those of you who are either brand new to analytics, excited to learn a little bit more, that's what we'll be covering today. So really what we'll be diving into is understanding analytics navigation. So how do we organize that information that we're receiving? We'll then dive into each of those different types of reports that you may have on your various plans. Now I will caveat this with that some of you may be on certain plans where you may not have access to all of these reports, where if you are on our Prime and Enterprise plans, you should have access to the most up-to-date analytics. We will be going over everything, but if you do have questions, please feel free to just type them in the question section. I will be happy to address them at the end as well as throughout this webinar, and even via email after this as well. Second, we'll be going over the default report. Third, we'll be talking about the inbox report. So how do we actually make sure that we're getting that information? Fourth, we'll go over team, and then fifth, that SLA report. So the first thing that you may be wondering is, how do I navigate in analytics? So I see that a lot of you are new to analytics. Some of you have been using it for a while, but for those of you who are new, starting here on the left-hand side, this is where we're actually going to have that navigation pane. So very similar to our front navigation pane when we're looking inside front, where this is where we'll actually see all of our saved reports. So we'll also see that skeletal structure breakdown in the two different parts. So up here at the top, we see those personal reports, and then below, you'll actually see all of those saved reports that you have for your team. To get to the analytics, for those of you who are completely new, have never even accessed it, or maybe you are a new admin on your team, all you'll have to do is just press that little bar chart icon, and that should take you right to the analytics. Moving to the right, we have our tab toggles. So we'll be diving into each of these. This is going to basically show us a few different metrics that we'll look at. Moving to the right again, we'll actually have, and I'm going to stay up here at the top, we have our time interval. So this is how we will look at basically the time that we are looking at for our analytics and our measurements. We'll have our business hours. So this is where you'll be able to set those hours that you do want to track, and we'll dive into that in just a little bit. And then we have the export button. So for those of you who do want to actually export, maybe run this a little bit deeper, or actually take this information and put it into some other systems, you can do that as well. Just below, you'll see our dashboard and this little compare toggle as well. So our dashboard is going to show you some high-level metrics based on the time interval that you have set. And this compare toggle will actually toggle between our current and previous time intervals. So if you see this little gray line behind the blue one, that's going to be the previous month based on this time interval. So we're looking at 1 month here. So previous is going to be the month prior. If you're looking at 1 week, it will be the same thing, basically current week and then previous week as well. Now, I always highly, highly encourage all of you to add individual inboxes to your analytics reports because this is going to add your individual inbox data. By default, the team reports will only compute data out of the team in the shared inboxes. And many of you who are operating out of your individual inboxes as well, whether those are for internal messages, external, many of you are working with clients directly from your individual inboxes. What you'll want to do is go to your settings, or if you are an admin, you can do this for your teammates as well. What you can do is click on teammates on that actual teammate. If you go to their individual inboxes, what you're able to do is then click that inbox and you'll see that little toggle, make visible in analytics. And you should be able to just toggle that and start displaying that information. Now, as I mentioned, business hours are going to be critical for how we're measuring some of these metrics. What business hours are going to do is they're actually going to help us think about when our team is actually in the office and expected to respond to messages. Basically, what we want to have Front do is track when, in theory, our team should be responding to conversations. By default, these hours are disabled. So basically, it's going to run on a 24-hour clock. But what you'll want to do is press that business hours icon in the top right and set up those business hours to say, basically, our team is in the office. So in this case, is 12 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that's where we would want to track the metric. Let's say whenever we get a message, it comes in maybe at 5:30 p.m. and we're not back into the office until 12 a.m. You're not actually going to compute time that is outside of those business hours because in theory, your team is not there. You're not expected to respond. If you have business hours off, again, you will run on that 24-hour clock. Good question. Can you change the business hours based on the report? So you can't change it based on the report. It's based on the team that you have set. So you can have multiple teams on our enterprise plan. Many teams who are on enterprise, who have global offices, will say our team in Singapore might have different business hours than our team in San Francisco. Excellent question. Another great question, what are the benefits of adding individual inboxes to analytics? So this is another way that you can start tracking those response times, how quickly your team is following up from their individual inbox as well. Oftentimes, depending on the use case, say for sales, an example, you might have your sales rep directly corresponding from their individual inbox. So a lot of their replies, a lot of their composed messages, that might be metrics that you track or that are important to you. Those are actually probably going to be more indicative of what's happening when you look at the individual inbox versus maybe the few messages that you might assign from a shared inbox to that individual teammate. Excellent question. So now let's dive into creating a report. So how do we slice and dice our data? So when creating these custom reports in analytics, what you'll always be able to do on the left-hand side in that navigation pane is you'll see this little plus button. Oh, sorry about that. And if you click that, you'll be able to create a new report. So on the right-hand side, you'll actually see what that report looks like. You'll be able to name that report and select the report type. By default, all of the report types, all of the plans have that default report. What you'll then be able to do is drill down into the specific data that you're looking to narrow down to, whether it's inboxes, channels, teammates, or tags. And the entire report will compute and display based on the data filters that you have set. So let's say you want to look at just a few inboxes, or maybe you just want to compare all of your emails and take out your phone and your SMS. You can build custom reports to do just that. So many teams might have a report based on the type of channel when they want to compare whether they are getting more phone calls, maybe more chats, or more emails to see where they should double down their efforts. So when thinking about which type of report you should use, when thinking about these reports, I always recommend starting with what is that goal that we want to accomplish? What are these KPIs that we are trying to measure with analytics? So if it's organizing our schedules, our staffing, maybe just trying to evaluate the use of our productivity inside front, or identifying our most active customers, always recommend that default report. If it's for tracking your internal SLAs, and SLA stands for a service level agreement. For those of you who are not familiar with this term, basically all that means is what is that time that you are either promising or have an internal promise to your team, to your company, that you will respond within a certain amount of time. So the service level agreement that you have to respond by 4 hours, 8 hours, 2 days, whatever that may be. If you're looking to analyze your teammates' performance, I always recommend looking at a team report, or if you don't have access to the team report, inside the default report itself. And then for tracking your resolved and unresolved work, as well as measuring the volume of communications received in your inboxes, I always recommend the inbox report. And we'll be diving in to these different report types right now. So the default report is when we want to get a holistic view of our team report. When we look in that default report, we're going to have a number of tabs at the top, and the first one is starting with that conversations. What this is going to show us is a measure of the volume of communications that are received in your inbox. At the very top, we'll see that activity graph over that time period that we have set. Just below, we'll have a summary of metrics, and then below that, we'll have our tags table. One thing to note here is that this tags table is actually going to show all of the tags that come up on messages that are going to be calculated in this report. So maybe if you have filtered a report by tags, and you might say, I'm seeing more tags than what I filtered on, it's because some of those conversations might actually have multiple tags. So you might have billing and urgent and bug on the same conversation. While you might not be filtering for bug, that conversation will pull up. Why should you use this conversation tab? What this is going to help us do is think about our hiring and staffing and organizing those shift schedules. So if I just navigate back here, what we're actually going to be able to see is that busiest time when we have our busiest day. This is going to help us think through when we need to staff more people, when we actually need to ensure that we have our team inside of the office. And I do see a number of questions that have come up here. So can we measure the number of outbound emails sent from the front inbox? Yes, in this conversation report, you'll actually be able to deep dive into that activity. You'll be able to see how many messages are sent as well as received. And you can toggle between that in this conversation tab. You can also deep dive into that activity, increase or decrease. So let's say you have a steady week and all of a sudden you see a spike of inbound messages on Thursday. You can start to uncover why that might be. Are you running a campaign? Did something happen that you might actually expect those other messages? Or you just have more active customers that day. You can leverage your tags to understand what your customers are talking to you about. What are those different topics that they're reaching out about? That way you can see if you need any other changes in your business that might relate to those. So let's say if you have an outage, maybe you have a business offer that is going on at a certain time. What you'll be able to do is leverage those tags to actually analyze how many of those conversations are related, as well as the types of inquiries that you receive. So hundreds of teams are leveraging tags in this way to say, anytime we get a specific type of inquiry, we can automatically tag it. That way we can know exactly what a customer is reaching out about and when, and we can also track it over time to see if we need to dedicate more resources to it. In this activity graph, what you'll be able to see starting on the left-hand side is the metric. Oops, sorry about that. I keep clicking the button. So the metric here on the left-hand side, This is going to be our messages received. You can toggle that and switch between a few different variables there. The focus or the focal point here is actually just going to be based on the specific day, hour, the actual date of the week, depending on where you have your business, that time interval set. You'll see the dates on the bottom, and then up at the top right, you'll be able to export this. So this is where we're going to identify trends and workloads across that selected period. That way we can see if we need help with any of our staffing. When looking at our key metrics, what we'll be able to see are those active conversations. So all of those that we're working on, all of our new conversations, which are going to be anything that is brand new to that time interval, the average per day, the total messages received, as well as the busiest day and busiest time. If you see any of these little numbers just underneath, either with like blue or red, that's actually going to be the trend versus the previous period that you have set. So basically, if we're looking at 1 month here, this is going to be our trend based on the most previous month. What these key metrics are going to do is give us a clear vision of our communication volumes. The tags table below, as I mentioned, is going to be a breakdown of the volume of tags to help take those business decisions. So whether they're about certain topics, whether it's about planning or team performance, you'll be able to see all of those conversations that you're having based on those certain metrics and export that as well. Now diving into what any of these metrics mean, what we're going to see here is that active conversations are all of those that are currently active in that select time period. New conversations are going to be those that, and I won't necessarily dive here into the distinct segments and what that means at a very high level. All it means is that this conversation is net new to the time period that you have set. So it's basically, think about it on a very basic level as if you've received a new inbound or net new outbound message in that time interval, rather than something that was already a conversation that you were working on from the previous week. Total messages received, pretty self-explanatory of all the messages received for a selected period. Same with conversations per day, an average of all of those conversations, as well as busiest day and busiest time, is looking at, on average, when are you receiving the most conversations. That second tab is going to be our team tab. And this is going to help us track performance week over week to ensure we're meeting our goals with our team summary up here at the top, as well as our team table just below. When we should think about using teams is this is going to help us reward our top performers, as well as audit our teammates' performance and even create a benchmark to see who is actually pacing well above the rest of the team, who are those top performers, and think about who are those people who might need a little bit more coaching or who are falling behind. That way we can help those individuals. Now, before we get any farther, I do want to talk about how we count time inside Front, because in this Teams summary, what you will see is a number of metrics around resolution, response time, all of these different metrics. And so it's important to talk about and break down how we think about reaction time, handle time, response time, all of these different things. So let's walk through this example here. So at 9 a.m., our team gets a new message right here. At 9:05, you actually assign the message to me. What this means, this is going to be your reaction time. Basically, how long did it take for somebody to react on that conversation? Let's say at 9:07, I open the message, and then I send a reply at 9:10. So, but by the time that I read the message and then send the message, that's going to be the handle time. Basically, how long did I actually acknowledge that this message existed and then send a response? But this whole time from 9 a.m. to 9:10, that's going to be our first response time. In theory, how long did it take for us as a business to respond to that customer? Let's say at 9:20, that customer has a few more questions that they want us to answer. And then we go ahead and we respond about 15 minutes later, send and archive that. So we know that that response time is going to be 15 minutes. Our average response time is going to be the average of both of those response times together. So we have 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here. But the resolution time is basically the sum of all of those response times that we received. So basically, how long in total was a customer waiting for us to resolve all of their inquiries? And in this case, it's going to be our 10 minutes plus our 15 minutes. Let's say the client replies back in the same thread about 7 days later. Based on the inactivity metric, on average, this is 5 days long. You can customize it in your inbox settings. It's going to, in theory, create what we consider a new conversation in analytics and is not going to be counted in the same response time averages or resolution time. I'm going to pause there to see if there are any questions around any of these variables. I know it's a lot to take in, but I'm hoping the image is helping it make sense. Okay, so I'll keep on moving. So when we actually look at these measurements, what we'll be able to see is those top reaction times. So at the top, you'll see that team summary. So reaction time, number of conversation, and reply sent. So this is going to be a summary of the top ranked teammates regarding reaction time, conversations, reply sent in that selected period. And then below that, you'll actually see that team summary. So basically that roll up by teammate of their performance. So some of the metrics we talked about, the handle time, response time, average first response time, so you can see all of those teammates and how they are performing. If you ever press those three little dots kind of in the top right of the table, you can customize that table as well. The third tab is going to be our productivity. So when I talk about the team tab versus our productivity tab, I always like to say that team is going to basically be that external or the internal focus, while productivity is going to be your metrics at an organizational level, basically what your clients or what your customers experience. So up at the top of this tab, we'll see our productivity summary. Below, we'll see our activity graph. And then to the right, we'll see that response time distribution. So we'll see a number of those similar metrics, but this is going to be rolled up at an organizational level. When you should think about and use productivity is when you evaluate the use of your productivity features. So thinking about those can responses, those rules, to see how quickly are you making sure to respond and resolve your conversations. This is an excellent way to report on larger team-wide goals. So not necessarily breaking it down by the teammate, but looking at those larger goals altogether. And lastly, to understand how specific initiatives affect team improvements. So if you're adding new team members, you're changing shifts altogether, maybe you have a reorg of your organization, you can actually see, are any of these actually impacting how our organization is performing on a high level? A few questions that are coming in. If there are multiple threads with the same email, will this track as one conversation? Great question. So if you have, so a conversation is basically, if you're thinking inside front, anytime you're clicking in like one of those conversations in that conversation list, all of those are conversations. So if you have maybe two separate conversations, but it's the same email, whether because you're emailed personally, somebody else is emailed, maybe a shared inbox, and you haven't merged them, those will all track as multiple conversations. The definition of a new conversation, so this is basically saying if you pass the inactivity period, so by default it's 5 days, where there's no activity that happens on that, and then something net new happens on that, that would be a new conversation. So Naveen, let's say you and I are emailing back and forth for the past week. I archive that message and I don't hear from you for a whole week. You go ahead, you respond back on that same conversation. Our analytics is basically going to track that as a new conversation because of the period that we would have set to mark that conversation as inactive. The number of emails newly composed by my teammates Really great question. That's just going to be the messages composed metric in that team graph. And our productivity summary, what we're going to understand here is a glance of our organization, whether they are providing fast and efficient replies to our customers. Just below in that activity graph, what we'll actually see here is the metric we want to look at. You can toggle this to switch between a few different ones to look at that chart over time. Again, we'll have that focus based on whether the hour, the week, the day, depending on what you have your time period set. And you can export this as well. And you'll also get a real-time breakdown of that time and basically what percentage is for each of those. Some of the metrics that we will see here is going to be that response time. So again, basically the average amount of time it took for us to reply to an inbound message, the number of replies it took us to resolve a conversation. So basically over that select date range, how long did it take for us, how many back and forth did it take for us to actually archive that conversation and pass an inactivity period? That resolution time is going to be the sum of all of those response times. First response time, pretty self-explanatory. Basically, the first time we respond in a conversation, what is that time? Total resolved conversations are the number of conversations that we have at least one reply for and that we've been archived and it's past our activity period. And resolved on first reply are the number of conversations that we only ever send one reply, send it off, and we then pass that inactivity period. I see a few questions coming in here. Yes, you will have, if you stay till the end of this webinar, you should automatically be sent an email of this to make sure that you're getting all of this information. And does this take into account snoozing an email? So if you go and snooze an email for the productivity, it's going to look as if the whole time is going to be calculated based on your business hours. So if you get an email, you snooze it, and for 2 hours, and then you go to respond to it, that will still be counted into your productivity. Basically, to say, what is that customer experiencing? The last tab that we'll see in our default report is our customers. This is going to help us identify our most active customers and the service we provide to each of them. We'll see that activity graph and that customer chart here as well. When should we use this customers tab? This is going to help us report statistics back to our customer, reflect on the time distribution we're spending on each of these clients, and determine and validate the most frequent customers. So often, many front clients are actually taking this information, downloading it, and sharing it directly with their clients to show that service that they are providing. Looking up here top at the activity graph at the top, what we'll be able to understand is how quickly, how many customers are receiving a reply from us. We'll be able to see all of those customers that we've helped. Again, this little metric here is going to compare to the last time, the most previous time period that we have. You can compare and contrast with this current and previous toggle. You'll see that focus and export this information as well. Just below that, you'll see a deep dive into all of those customers. If you click on any one of them, you should be able to deep dive. You'll see all of the messages that they've received, the messages they've sent, and some of those metrics just based on that actual individual. So the first response, average resolution. You can identify your most active customers and the level of service provided. Now, for our inbox report, this is going to be different than the default report that we just talked about. What we'll be able to dive in here is to monitor the state of our communications at a glance. Why would we want to use this inbox report? Well, this is going to be critical to understanding the total volume of communications that is occurring, what is new in that volume, and what has actually been resolved. So the main metrics that we'll want to look at here are the actual volumes of communication, how much new workload we have received over the time that we've set, how much is finished, and basically how much is still open that we still need to complete in those inboxes. When creating that inbox report, what we'll want to do is always press that little plus button to create a new report. But in this type right here, you'll actually want to select that dropdown. And instead of default, you're going to select inboxes. And then you can filter based on all inboxes, just one, just a few, all channels. The same filters that you would have for the default, you can do in your inbox report as well. Inside this report, what we're going to see is looking at all of those inboxes and making sure that none of our work is falling through the cracks. So we'll be able to see those feature metrics, that conversation graph, those metrics tables just below as well. For those feature metrics, what we'll be able to do is understand quickly the volume received. So how many of those conversations, how many are new, how many messages we've received, again, messages sent, response time, and resolution time. Just below on the graph, we'll be able to look at those metrics, toggle between them in a graph fashion, see that focus, export that information, and identify the trends in the volume of the conversations that we're having. Just below, this is going to help us break down and benchmark the volume of conversations by inbox and start to look at how many are resolved, how many are unresolved, to really understand based on the inboxes. So before, you might have seen the tags here. Now it's based on inboxes. So how many conversations are we having? How many are new? How many are we saying, yep, we've done everything we needed to? And how many are unresolved, meaning that we're still working on it? Again, if you press those three dots, you can toggle between any one of checking, unchecking all of these metrics to customize this based on the information you would want to see. Now, some of the definitions in our inbox report first are going to be our conversations. So this is going to be a distinct count of all of those inbound, outbound replies or move activity that happen in a given inbox. So basically, again, if you think of any time you kind of click inside your conversation list and you're clicking between messages, each one of those is going to be a new conversation. New conversations, and let me clarify, each one of those is going to be an independent conversation. New conversations, on the other hand, is basically going to say anytime you receive something that is completely net new, or if it's in an old conversation, but it has passed some level of inactivity that you set based on the inbox, that is where you're going to have new conversation. And again, to give this as an example, let's say you in your inbox setting say that the new conversation will start after 2 days of no activity. If you and I are emailing back and forth, we have all of these conversations, or we have one conversation, all these messages back and forth, and then I don't hear from you for 3 days and you write back in, Front is going to calculate that as a new conversation based on that definition that you have set. Messages received are going to be all of the messages received in an inbox. Messages sent, self-explanatory, all of the messages that you've sent from that inbox. Response time is calculating the sum, so basically the average of all the response times. And first response time is basically an average of the first time that you are responding on any given conversation. Good question. Are there conversations registered to an inbox according to where they were originally received to or where they are somehow actioned? Example, someone sends a message to the wrong email, we move it to the correct one, and then send it from there. So this is going to be basically based on the inbox. So you can see here the move activity in a given inbox. So let's say I receive a message. We're going to track that as a message received in the wrong email. We move it. We're sending a message from our new inbox. We'll have that message sent from the other inbox. Great question. Any questions about our team custom report? The inbox report. And if not, we'll go ahead and dive into the team report here. What this is going to help us do is understand our team's handle time and the individual workload for our teammates. Why might we use the team report? This is going to be our ideal place to monitor our team productivity, identify when our team is actually overloaded, maybe they have too much that they're working on, maybe we need to hire a few more people, and help you make the best decisions to serve your customers. Not only will you be able to track those volumes of messages, but you can really look at those response times and understand this by your teammates to make sure that everyone is on track, meeting your goals, meeting your internal KPIs or key performance indicators, so that they are providing the best in-class service for your customers. And if you see some teammates falling behind, you can have those conversations with them to see what's going on, to see how you can best help them. And I see another question here. Could you show us again how we look at a report that includes our teammates' personal inboxes? So all you'll need to do is, once you have those personal inboxes added, so basically if you go to their teammates section inside their settings, click on their inbox, you'll see a little toggle that will say add this to analytics. And then when you customize this report, which is actually this next slide here, what you'll do is in this inbox section right here, you'll actually select their inboxes as well. So you'll be able to choose between the inboxes that you would want to see. So when creating our team report, what we'll be able to do, again, inside analytics, we'll always press that little plus button to make sure that we're building a new report. And under the type dropdown, we're going to select team. So we'll see all those different types. We've talked about default, we've talked about inbox. Now we're going to go into our team performance right here. Again, using all those filters to further narrow down the specific inbox channels, teammates, and tags that you would want to. If you do want to look at specific inboxes based on individual teammates, as long as they have been enabled in analytics, you can just check all of those in that inbox section. Inside our teammate report, what we'll be able to do is understand that workload and performance at a glance with our featured metrics up at the top, our conversation graph just below, and then that metrics table below that based on our teammates. So those featured metrics are going to be our total conversations, resolved, unresolved, those that are new, as well as our first response time and our average handle time. So again, when we talked about that handle time, that metric is basically how long from the time I saw the message to my response did that take me? So if somebody assigned an email to me 2 hours ago, but I haven't had time to read it, but I read it and then immediately responded in 10 minutes, my handle time is going to be 10 minutes. Great question. So team report, does it take into account both assigned and individual conversations per each team member? Yes, it will take into account all of the conversations from the inboxes that you are reporting on. So if you have their individual inboxes tracked in there, you should take into account conversations based on their response to those individual inbox conversations that they're replying themselves, as well as if you're tracking on the team inboxes, you're going to say, okay, somebody from the team responded to this message. Who was that teammate? What was that time? Attribute that number to them in this report. In our conversation graph, this is, as always, going to help us identify our trends in volume and real-time related metrics. We'll see our metrics up here, our focus, our time range, and then the export. And then just below, lastly, is going to be that metrics table. So this will help us deep dive into each of our teammates' performance and help audit the team. So we'll see all of those conversations that they've ever touched, all of those assigned conversations. So how many were they actually assigned? How many did they resolve? How many are unresolved from them? The average handle time of those conversations, average response time, resolution time, messages sent, and again, can customize all of this to see those metrics that are important to you and the team. Now, a few definitions here. So conversations touched, this is basically how many conversations is a teammate actually interacting with, whether it's because they're assigning, unassigning, archiving, sending an outbound reply, actually sending the first message, they were the assignee, they commented, any of these types of actions on a message, basically anything that they've done to that message other than click it and read it, this is basically going to help you understand what is their workload. This is also a great way to track if you have like team leaders or team managers who are basically, they're getting looped into a lot of conversations, but they're not the ones replying. So a team manager will usually be @mentioned a lot, be looped into conversations to get approval, a thumbs up, get their eyes on something. They can hop in, leave a comment, and our teammates report is going to track it with our conversations touched. Handle time is going to be how long a teammate takes on average, again, to respond after they view that conversation for the first time. So this is going to help basically weed out if they are working on other conversations, but things are assigning to them, whether from their teammates or via rules, but they have not read that conversation. This is going to help you drill down to the difference between just the response time as well as the actual time it took them once they saw that message. Response time, resolution, and first response time. Won't spend too much more time here since I think we've kind of gone into that in depth. Again, very similar metrics that we've talked about, but it's just now going to be broken down by teammate. And before we dive into our SLA reports, are there any other questions around our team report? I see a few people typing, so I'll just give them a second and see if there are any questions. I do see a question here. Does archiving in a team inbox archive in a personal inbox? Really excellent question. So let's say something has been sent to a team inbox and maybe 10 teammates are @mentioned. If you archive that message in the team inbox, it is going to basically archive it for the purpose of analytics, but not necessarily the view of the teammate themselves. So let's say I'm @mentioned, somebody archives it. My own personal view, I will actually see a little banner at the bottom to say it has been archived in the team inbox, but it's not going to archive your view. So you never have to worry about anything that any other teammate does inside a front is never going to impact your personal workspace at the top. So anything that is assigned to you, shared with you, any of those discussions, or anything that is emailed to you directly, only you can manage that. Really excellent question. Now let's dive into our last type of reporting style, being those SLA reports. Now, when creating our SLA report, what we're going to want to do, much like all of those other reports, is click that plus button, and you're going to see a new field called the type SLA right here, and that's what we'll want to select. Now, when you do this, you're actually going to see this SLA rules section pop up at the bottom of these metrics, because you're going to have to select at least one existing SLA rule to create your report. So for those of you who are on plans and building those SLA rules, this is how you're going to just very easily create those reports and track those SLAs. And again, for those of you who aren't familiar with SLAs, that just stands for service level agreement, basically meaning the time that you are committing to responding back to conversations. What you'll be able to do based on these SLAs is still filter on the channels, teammates, tags, and again, based on the rules that you have set. So if you have 10 different SLA type rules, you can have a report for all of them. Maybe you just want one for certain inboxes or for certain rules, you can filter there as well. You can also, we also make this very easy for you in just creating that report from your rules engine. So when building that SLA rule, just at the very bottom, if you just click that little check mark, it's automatically going to create this report for you. Now, the main metrics here, this is going to give us a snapshot of our SLA performance with this overview here at the top. So we're going to see all of those total resolved conversations that have basically passed that SLA warning, that SLA breach, as well as those that are still unresolved, how many breaches we actually have. So a breach is basically when we pass the time. If we told customers or we have an internal goal of responding in 2 hours, a breach means that it took us longer than 2 hours to respond. We're going to see how many conversations are resolved on first reply, and then what is our average response time overall. A few definitions here that you'll start to see are those total resolved conversations. So again, basically, if we pass some level of inactivity that we have set by the inbox, we consider the conversation resolved. We'll have the total unresolved conversations, so how many that we have not yet considered resolved. The SLA breaches is basically if we are going to have that rule automatically apply one of those tags, the SLA breach tag, on that conversation, that will be tracked here. And this is going to be the rule that you have in that report filter. Resolved on first reply is just going to be any of those conversations that are considered resolved and only have one reply. And response time, again, taking the sum of all of those individual response times, dividing that by all of the replies sent to get that average. You'll also see our SLA trend here as well. So we'll see resolved conversations, SLA breach, warning, and open conversations. So this is going to help us identify our trends and time breaches for our level of service. So we can actually see here, okay, for our SLA breaches, doing pretty well. All of a sudden on this day, we have so many more breaches. Maybe it's because we were swamped, we had an outage, something that made it so we received so many more messages that we couldn't respond fast enough. But digging into what those actual definitions mean, the total resolved conversations, again, all of those conversations that are resolved. SLA breaches is going to be based on our rule. The SLA warning will also be based on our rule, but this is going to be a little bit different because this tag is basically going to say, we want to apply a warning that is going to be before we would breach that SLA. So what that means is, let's say we have an SLA of 2 hours. We want to respond within 2 hours. We could add a warning tag to say, tag this conversation with a warning at 1 hour, basically to prompt our team to say, okay, we only have 1 hour left to complete this conversation. Archive it, send that response, whatever you need to do to make sure that we are responding so that we don't breach that conversation. So I always like to tell people to look at their warnings and their breaches, because if you see a high number of warnings and 0 breaches, that's actually really great. What that probably means is you can start to even reduce your own internal SLA time because you're actually not passing your breach at all. And so you can probably try to be a little bit more ambitious and say, okay, instead of 2 hours, we want it to be an hour and a half, and we're gonna make our warning 45 minutes. The open conversations are going to be all of those conversations that are open at the time of a given period. And I know this question was asked a little bit earlier, but I will kind of address this again here. Snooze conversations are included in this count. So you can't just get by your SLAs by saying, okay, we're gonna snooze all these conversations for a week, not address them at all, and they won't be, we're gonna kind of cheat analytics. So we won't let you do that. You do have to make sure that you're still responding to those. So our detailed metrics chart, what we're going to see here is going to be a deep dive into our performance with volume and time related metrics. So we'll actually see all conversations, those that have been breached, those that we have the warnings, the resolved on time, the unresolved, and you can see kind of the number of conversations and some information about those as well. You'll also see a time metrics chart here. So what this is going to show us is that we're going to see basically our replies after we have a breach. How quickly are we responding to those? The time of our replies in general and of our resolutions in general as well. And I'm going to pause there for just a moment to see if there are any questions around the SLA report. And I do see one just came in. Can SLAs be set up only during working hours? Example, we only have 1 hour left before a breach, but it's also our log off time. How do we go with that? Really great question. When you set up an SLA, it will actually give you the option for basically to set with your business hours. So you can say, we want to track this within our business hours or not. And so you should be able to just see that directly inside the SLA rules builder itself. Really excellent question. And now just the last thing that I do want to show all of you, I know that analytics can sometimes, you can say, wow, Matt, this was definitely a lot to chew today, but I do want to show you a trick really to dive down a little bit more if you are trying to figure out what might be happening in some of the metrics that you are seeing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to share my front screen. Again, what we'll be seeing here on the left-hand side are personal reports, as well as all of those custom reports that we have, whether it's our team performance, our SLAs, tags, our inboxes, or our default reports. Now, if you are curious, you say, some of these metrics, you know what, I'm just trying to understand, why does this number seem so high? I always recommend to run a business export. What you're able to do is run a message export. And when you do this, one of those variables in the column is going to be that conversation ID. So when you get that export, you can actually take a look to see, I wonder what conversation, why is this conversation 14 hours for us to respond when everything else is under 10 minutes? Once you get that conversation ID, inside front, if you ever press Shift and O, you can actually paste that conversation ID, and it's going to kind of be like a series of letters, CNV underscore a series of letters and numbers. What you'll be able to do right here is actually hop directly to that conversation. So I'll just show you an example here. I'm going to get this conversation ID. Let's say, I'm somewhere completely random inside front. If I press Shift-O, I can hop directly to that conversation and see exactly what happened. That way it can help me diagnose a little bit to understand, is this an outlier? Is this something that was just one-off, or was there a serious problem? And with that, I know that we have about 5 minutes left here. So I'm going to open the floor for our last few minutes to see if anyone has any questions that I am able to assist with, whether it's about building these reports, customizing them, measuring some of these things in analytics, different use cases that you might be interested in, or KPIs that you would be interested in tracking. If you don't have any questions, what you can do, just go ahead, log off. You should be able to receive a recording link here in about 5 to 10 minutes. And you have, I think, maybe 8 to 10 days to watch this recording after. But as always, if you have any questions at all, please always feel free to email me at matthew@frontapp.com. And I'll just chat my email right there. That way, I'm happy to dig in, happy to help diagnose, understand what might be happening, a little bit more specific in the metrics that you're looking at. But these are an extremely powerful way for you and your team to start leveraging Front in a way that can help power the heart of your business, really track and exceed these KPIs. Good question. Are there any analytics regarding read receipt data? No, we currently do not track that. So if you're sending all this information, we don't actually track in an analytics fashion how many times your conversations are open, how many times they're read. Excellent question, though. Of course, thank you so much for joining, for the participation in this webinar. We don't do the analytics one often, but I hope that this was helpful for all of you. If you want to see this on the calendar more frequently, please let me know. Email me feedback, what you liked, what you didn't like. We do one of these custom webinars every month. We're happy to increase that based on the demand that we're receiving from our customers. So whether you said 2 thumbs up, would love to have this again, dive into a few more questions or a few more specifics, please send me any and all feedback that you have. And seeing no other questions, I'll go ahead, I'll just end this webinar. And again, once it buffers, you should get a link to watch this in the future for the next week or so. And I hope you all have an amazing Thursday and wonderful rest of your week. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.